So Chris, in this episode, we're going to talk about stopping your motorcycle in an emergency situation in the shortest distance possible. And it's not just how well the bike stops, is it?
No, it's starting to think about our reaction time. How can we get our bike to slow maybe a little bit more quickly? And you will hear all different kinds of situations and different training programs as they're teaching these emergency stops. But I think they're missing a big element of it, which is we want to be able to cover our brakes as we're trying to stop our motorcycle.
And that's what we teach. We've taught this at every program we do. And covering your brakes is simply, right, hands up on the brake levers you're riding. And Chris, uncovered is what? Show us that.
Just rolling hand on the throttle like this. And you know, where the time really gets made is the moment of me closing the throttle when I go, wow, that car pulled out in front of me. I close the throttle, now I have to reach to it. We've done a lot of data acquisition at the schools. We'll put student on data bikes, and you will see a very proficient rider. If it doesn't close immediately to the brakes, there's at least a half a second lag where you'll see the throttle shut in the data before the brakes start to come on.
Have you watched riders ride in hot, heavy traffic like this?
All the time.
And this is why we're having problems at intersections. You're approaching an intersection like this, uncovered. You have a reaction time when the car turns and you recognize that's a danger to get that fingers out onto that brake lever and pull that brake lever.
A motorcyclist seriously injured today in a crash in Chesterfield. It happened at the intersection of Mall Drive.
Breaking news, a life-threatening vehicle accident involving a motorcycle and an SUV has shut down surveillance.
During that reaction time that you are traveling closer to the car that just pulled out in front of you, and you're almost always going to grab it and panic, maybe even lock the front, go into ABS, etc., because you're so panicked. And this is called covering the brake lever. And what we'll do is we're riding up in the canyons where there are deer and who knows what else. We're riding like this as we accelerate, leaving our fingers out, closing to the brake lever, closing to the brake lever. If we're in the canyons like this, Chris, and the deer pulls out.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And this really is like intersections are the #2 place in America where riders are dying on the street. So when you think about the car that turned left in front of the rider, you know, we have one of our coaches was a motor officer for 30 years. He says, really you'd see one or two things. One, before they ever closed the throttle and got to the brakes, they would have already hit the car. The reaction time was so slow getting to the lever that there was no signs of the bike slowing down before they made contact, which is a pretty tough deal. And he said the other part was they were so late. By the time they actually got to the lever, they were so abrupt that they might even lock up or crash into the car because they just weren't putting themselves in the best position to avoid the hazard.
And then we'll get a rider say, you know what, I don't cover the front brake, but I cover the rear brake. On an expert level rider, stopping the bike as hard as they can, front brake only, rear brake only. What have you seen in the difference?
The rear brake is just significantly worse. I mean, you can stop a bike very, very quickly with the front. Not saying you won't stop it with the rear, but you could look at it being double or triple the distance on a sport bike. Maybe if you have a big long wheelbase bike like a Harley, there's quite a bit there to the rear, but you know, on most of these sporty bikes, once the weight goes forward, the rear is relatively underloaded and not doing a whole lot.
So if you're covering the rear brake only, not the front brake in traffic, thinking you're okay, the problem is by practicing that incorrect technique when it really matters, when you pop over the rise at 60 miles an hour and traffic is stopped for road construction, you've only got that rear covered and you lock it immediately. It just does not provide any stopping power. So we're always going to try to practice the best practices as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out on the skid pad. We're going to ride side by side, set our cruise control so we know it's exactly probably 30 miles an hour.
Yep.
One of us will cover, one of us will not. Coop, he will honk the horn. When we hear the horn honk, we're both going to stop our bikes as quickly as possible. I think it's fair to say we're both expert level riders. We'll be able to get to that pry into ABS pretty quickly, stop the bike as hard as we can, and then all we'll measure the reaction time of the person who was covered riding like this on the freeway and the rider who was riding like this on the freeway. You learn anything?
Learned a little bit. We learned that not covering the brakes really is a significant amount of time that it takes to get the bike slowing, and in those emergency situations. If you could stop 3, 4, 5, 15 feet sooner, whatever it is, that might be the thing that saves your life.
We need to just extrapolate this out from 30 miles an hour, which was our speed, extrapolate that distance out to speed. And if you're riding at 65 miles an hour on the freeway and think something happens, a surprise, and you are uncovered, if your hand is like this, riders, you will be a statistic. You'll be another person who quits riding motorcycles because somebody turned in front of you. Well, someone turned in front of that person, but they were riding like this. It took them a half a second, maybe 3/4 of a second to even get to the brake lever. And of course, at that point, they're so much closer to the car that they panic. And so this covering the brake, it is, I mean, the percentage of time you cover the brake on the street when you're street riding.
It's the majority of it. I would say, unless I was on a big long interstate and I could see both sides of the road for a huge distance, middle of the desert or something, yeah, probably you'll be okay putting your hand away, but in town, never goes away. The twisties never goes away. Blind corners, you're always covering. You just want to be in a position where if you need to slow your motorcycle, you're going to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Have you seen racers ride through the pits like this?
At the back of the grid,
Yeah.
But you watch any of the pro front guys winning the races, they're rolling through the pits with their fingers on that lever because it should really start to feel wrong. You're doing something wrong on the motorcycle when you are not in a position to slow it.
On the racetrack, because we know there's generally speaking no deer, no dogs, we can come in, trail brake in, come off the brakes, put our hand back there and drive it out. No big deal. But I will encourage track day riders and racers, when you're in heavy traffic, the first lap, when things are heavy traffic, if your fingers are up there, you're driving off the corner and your fingers are rolling up off the brake lever, that's perfectly fine. And now the rider ahead of you misses a shift, you can get to that brake. And it's happened to one of our instructors, and he won a championship simply because he didn't hit that person who missed that shift because he was covering that brake lever. So it becomes important in everything we do, in the pits, in heavy traffic, but for street riders, it is a lifesaver. And how many students have written to us, guys, thanks for the school. Here's what happened. I was covering my brake lever.
Yeah, I mean, it's countless, the amount of emails. That's probably the number one thing I think we hear back on was this crazy thing happened and I barely survived, but I survived because I was in a position to adjust earlier than I was before the school.
Exactly right. Cut that reaction time, shortens that brake. And the final thought for me is, if you've heard something else, something different somewhere else, riders, get over this idea of some type of cult that you believe in. What works best? What's best practices? What's best practices as far as approaching an intersection, Chris?
Having those fingers up on that brake lever for whatever crazy thing's about to happen. Someone steps out of the intersection, the car turns left in front of you. You want to be in that position to adjust.